Mr. Impossible could do the most amazing things. For instance, he could jump over a house. Impossible. And Mr. Impossible could make himself invisible. All he had to do was to stand there and think about becoming invisible, and he became invisible. Impossible. And Mr. Impossible could fly. All he had to do was stand there and flap his arms about, and off he flew. Impossible. He lived in an impossible-looking house. Have you ever seen a house in such an impossible place? Of course not. One day, he was out walking in the woods when he met a boy called William. William was on his way to school. "Hello there," said Mr. Impossible. "Hello," said William. "I'm William." "I'm impossible." "Really?" said William. "Sure am," smiled Mr. Impossible. "Could you do impossible things?" asked William. "Haven't come across anything I couldn't do." William thought. "Can you climb up that tree?" he asked, pointing to the biggest tree in the wood. "Oh, I can do better than that," replied Mr. Impossible. "I can walk up that tree." And he did. William thought again. Can you stand on one hand?" he asked. "Oh, I can do better than that," replied Mr. Impossible. "I can stand on no hands." And he did. "Huh, that's impossible," cried William. "Sure is," replied Mr. Impossible. Then William remembered that he was on his way to school. "Why don't you come with me?" he asked. "But I've never been to school before." "Then it's time you did," replied William. "Come on." William and Mr. Impossible sat at the back of William's classroom with all the other children. The teacher came in, but didn't notice that there was somebody extra in his class that morning. "Morning, children," he said. "I have a very difficult sum for you to do today. It will take you most of the morning to work out the answer." And he wrote the sum on the blackboard. It really was the most difficult sum William had ever seen in his whole life, full of adding up and taking away and multiplications and divisions and other things William didn't enjoy. The teacher was right. It would indeed take up most of the morning to work out the answer, if not most of the afternoon as well. Mr. Impossible whispered in William's ear. William put up his hand. "Yes, William," said the teacher. "Is there something about the sum that you don't understand?" "Please, sir," said William, "is the answer 23? Teacher was very, absolutely, totally, completely amazed. "How did you work out the sum so quickly?" he gasped. "It's impossible." "Ain't nothing impossible, mister," said Mr. Impossible from the back of the class and stood up. "Well, I never did," exclaimed the teacher. After that, Mr. Impossible spent all day at the school. He showed the teacher how he could read a book upside down. "But that's impossible," said the children who were watching. "Yes, sir," said Mr. Impossible. Then William asked Mr. Impossible if he'd like to play in the school football match. "We sure would," replied Mr. Impossible, "but I ain't never played football before." And you know what he did? He kicked the football so high into the air Then when it came down, it had snow on it. Impossible. Then it was time to go home. Mr. Impossible said goodbye to all the people at school, and then he said goodbye to William. Goodbye, Mr. Impossible, said William. So long, William, said Mr. Impossible. He just disappeared. William rubbed his eyes and went home. William's mother and father were waiting for him. Hello, William, they said. You have a good day at school? Yes, he replied. And I met someone who can do anything in the world. Oh, really, William? They both laughed. You're impossible. William smiled and went inside. And 100 miles away, a small figure was listening to what William's mother and father were saying. And then he went to sleep, standing on his head. And we all know that that is downright impossible. Yes, sir.
Sometimes in sunshine, sometimes in style, sometimes with no time or just with a smile. Up to her eyes in surprises and tricks, no disguising. She's a little handful of trouble, a bundle of fun. Glad you could make it, so glad you could come. Little Miss, we're waiting for you. Ready, steady, how do you do?
Early one morning in summer, little Miss Magic awoke in the bedroom of Abracadabra Cottage, which was where she lived. She yawned a yawn and got out of bed. She went to the bathroom to clean her teeth.
Squeeze.
She said to the tube of toothpaste. And guess what? The tube of toothpaste jumped up and squeezed itself onto Little Miss Magic's toothbrush. Honestly, Little Miss Magic isn't called Little Miss Magic for nothing. When she tells something to do something, it does it. She went downstairs to the kitchen.
Boil.
She said to the kettle, and it did.
Toast.
She said to the toaster.
Spread.
She said to the knife, and the knife jumped up and spread some butter onto the toast.
Pour.
She said to the coffee pot, don't you wish you could make things do things like that? She was enjoying a second cup of coffee when there was a knock at the door.
Open.
She said to the door. And it did. There stood Mr. Happy, looking exactly the opposite.
Oh, you don't look your usual self. What's the matter?
Everything.
Come in and tell me all about it. Would you like a cup of coffee?
Yes, please,
Pour.
she said to the coffee pot.
Sugar?
2, please.
Lumps. Jump.
2 lumps jumped out of the sugar bowl and plopped into the cup.
Stir.
And a spoon stirred Mr. Happy's coffee.
Now, what is it?
Well, it's Mr. Tickle. He's become absolutely impossible.
What do you mean?
Well, he used to go around tickling people every now and then. But now he's going around tickling people all the time. He sighed. Little Miss Magic looked at him.
It can't be that bad. Cheer up.
And of course he did.
Come on, we'll go and see Mr. Tickle together. Open.
She said to the door.
After you.
And off they set from Abracadabra Cottage. Mr. Tickle was in full cry. What a Monday morning he was having. He tickled Mr. Mean until he moaned. He tickled Mr. Greedy until he groaned. He tickled Little Miss Sunshine until she shivered. He tickled Mr. Quiet until he quivered. He tickled Little Miss Plump until she pleaded, and Little Miss Shy until she sobbed. Not to mention the postman, a policeman, the doctor, 3 dogs, 2 cats, and a worm. Ha ha! Cried Mr. Tickle as he spied little Miss Magic and Mr. Happy. Anyone for tickles? And he rushed up to them, reaching out those extraordinarily long arms of his, with those particularly ticklish fingers on the ends of them. Little Miss Magic looked at Mr. Happy
I see what you mean.
and winked. She pointed at Mr. Tickle's extraordinarily long right arm,
Shrink.
she said, and then she pointed to Mr. Tickle's extraordinarily long left arm.
Shrink.
And as you remember, when little Miss Magic tells something to do something, it does it. Mr. Tickle's arms were suddenly not extraordinarily long. They were extraordinarily ordinary. That's not fair! You've spoiled my fun! Well, it might have been fun for you, remarked Mr. Happy, but it wasn't much fun for anybody else,
Come and see me tomorrow.
said little Miss Magic to Mr. Tickle.
There.
She said to Mr. Happy.
Happy now?
And Mr. Happy smiled that famous smile of his. Oh, I'll say. Come on, I'll buy you an ice cream. And off they went to find an ice cream van,
Ding dong.
said Miss Magic. Two raspberry ripples, said Mr. Happy, laughing. On Tuesday, Mr. Tickle went round to Abracadabra Cottage. He knocked at the door,
Open.
and of course the door opened by itself.
Oh, hello, Mr. Tickle. Come in. I expect you'd like me to make your arms long again.
Oh, yes, please.
Very well.
Mr. Tickle's face lit up.
On one condition.
Oh. His face fell.
You're only allowed one tickle a day.
One tickle a day? Well, that's not much.
Promise?
Mr. Tickle sighed. Oh, promise.
Grow.
And both Mr. Tickle's arms grew back to their original long length.
Now don't forget, one tickle a day, or else.
Oh. Mr. Tickle went out through the door.
Goodbye.
She said to him.
Shut.
She said, and of course it did. Mr. Tickle stood outside little Miss Magic's cottage. Oh, well, he thought, one tickle a day is better than no tickles a day. It was then that he saw one of the downstairs windows of Abracadabra Cottage was open. One tickle a day, he thought, and a small smile came to his face. One tickle a day. And on that Tuesday morning, as one of those extraordinarily long arms reached in through the open window of Abracadabra Cottage, the small smile on the face of Mr. Tickle turned into a giant grin. One tickle a day!
She's blunt.
He's not very late and naughty.